Hi, welcome to the 56th Chicago International Film Festival. My name is Anthony Kaufman, Senior Programmer at the festival. Thank you for joining us for our morning coffee talk today, Politics and Protest, Making Movies in the Intense Now. We have some really exciting guests with us, filmmakers with films at the festival. Should have a stimulating conversation. Let me introduce them. First, Canas Liu. She is a Hong Kong-born filmmaker, has produced 2 documentaries about the umbrella movement. Comrades, which is playing at the festival, is their second short documentary about the protests against the extradition bill in Hong Kong, which started in the summer of 2019. The film premiered at the Berlin International Film Festival. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. And from Germany, Julia von Heinz. Her films have won important awards, including the German Film Award, Bavarian Television Award, and the Golden Sparrow, and shown at many international film festivals. Selection of her films include Nothing Else Matters, Noble Commitments, Rosa's Children, Hannah's Journey, I'm Off Then, and tomorrow, The Entire World, which recently premiered at the Venice International Film Festival and is playing here and Chicago International, and Gordon Quinn, artistic director and founding member of Quinn Films. Emmy-winning filmmaker Gordon Quinn has been making documentaries for over 50 years. One of the most famous films at Quinn, of course, is Hoop Dreams, and also recently the Oscar-nominated Minding the Gap. As a director, Gordon has recently completed Prisoner of Her Past, about a Holocaust survivor, and 63 Boycott, about the 1963 Chicago public schools boycott. And as Gordon was telling me before we went live, he was protesting back at the in 1968 in Chicago, so has a long history of protest. So let's get started because not all the viewers are familiar with the films at this year's festival. If you can just tell us very briefly, introduce each of the projects that are here. And I think maybe it might be worth adding also, what is the current political situation as you see it in your countries related to the issues that the films are dealing with? Julia, why don't you get started?
Yeah. My film, And Tomorrow the Entire World, is about a young woman. She's in her early 20s and she joins the Antifa movement. Trump actually made that Antifa name quite popular again. It was very strong in the 90s, then it went less strong, and it totally came back in the last 5 years because fascism rose again. The right-wing people, there were more and more in the last 5 years. So, of course, also Antifa became stronger. And so Louisa, in my film, she comes into that group. She's fascinated. And very soon she has to decide whether violence can be a political mean against right-wing people. And the group gets destroyed over that question. People have totally different opinions. She's torn. And she also discovers that the group is not really what she thought it would be. She discovers it's a lot of white privileged people also. They can always choose to leave that kind of groups again. So it's also a little bit critical about the Antifa and how it is. And I don't want to tell how her decision goes. You have to see the film. And of course, this has a lot to do with the situation in Germany, because since 2015, we have the AfD. It's a very right-wing party, and they have now 15%, which is a lot.
Okay, yeah. Canis?
Yeah, my film is Comrades. It's a documentary short. It's about the anti-extradition law since 2019 in Hong Kong. Yeah, actually, I have made more than 5 documentary shorts during this period of time, because we actually our working practices just like that. We film for 1 day or 2 days, and then we have a quick edit for 2 or 3 days, and after we edit, we put the first version of our film online, because I have experienced that in the 2014, there is an umbrella revolution in Hong Kong, or umbrella movement, someone will say that. I have also made some documentaries of that movement, umbrella movement, but I have finished my documentary 2 years later in 2016. Hong Kong was experiencing a political depression at that period of time. Some audience asked me at the Q&A session, after she said that, I have watched your film now, what can we do next? So because I'm filmmaker, I can't tell the audience what should they react, what should they do. I want them to think what should they react.
Yeah.
So in this revolutions, or in this social protest in 2019 and till now, I try to make my film very quickly and put it online, because I want Hong Kong people watch my film, and then they think what should they react, what should they do, what is happening at the front line. So I want to make some changes for Hong Kong people to think more. I don't want to experience again that in the Q&A session they ask me what should they do. So I choose this working format for this documentary series. And in Hong Kong, actually, this year in July, there is a national security law is introduced in Hong Kong. It's so sweeping, because the cost of the protester to go to protest or demonstration increase a lot, because when they can be arrested by the Chinese police and sent to China, because the law have give them the authority to do so. So of course there are some conditions, but the rules or the regulations is so weak that it can be easily to do that. So actually Hong Kong is experiencing a very terrible time now. It's the most terrible time that I have been born.
Okay. Sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Gordon?
So I'm here representing Steve James' epic film, 5 episodes, City So Real, which is, it's not really looking at protest, it's looking at our city, and the protests are the backdrop of what's going on. The coronavirus is part of what the backdrop is, and it began back in the murder of Laquan McDonald by a policeman, and carries you all the way through the George Floyd thing. But what was in Steve's mind was to do a kind of portrait of the city, of all the different kinds of people and communities and things that are in the city, a little bit like Chris Marker's film. And in many ways, because the protest and because of the political situation and the mayoral race, those things sort of took over the series in a certain kind of way. So it does weave in all these different things, including people in barbershops, in white communities and barbershops and Black communities, and getting all of that kind of dialogue. One of my favorite characters is the Lyft driver, who appears several times throughout the series. And so that's kind of what City So Real is. And I must say, I'm kind of, it's our film, so I'm prejudiced, but I've been watching a lot of documentary series lately, and City So Real is not a film where you sit through it and feel like, oh, I already saw this, where it's been stretched out to be a series. It's City So Real is pretty dense viewing.
I mean, it's interesting with City So Real, that the film is sort of in some ways bracketed by the protests around the shooting of Laquan McDonald in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, it doesn't take long before we get to George Floyd and the protests around that. And I mean, obviously the film is about lots of other things, but it seems like the social unrest that's facing Chicago and lots of cities right now is ever present. I'm wondering, as filmmakers, for all of you, how do you feel like film can and should capture this moment of unrest? What is the sort of responsibility maybe of filmmakers to communicate what's happening, both in the documentary form, but also in the fiction form?
I heard many times, now people want to escape. Now we need funny films. Now we need, fantasy films. And probably it's right. Probably people, because there's so much going on, people love to escape with movies. But I think we are also chronologists, and I think we should also tell the stories of our time. And I think films can totally make the world a worse place by being propaganda films, by sexualizing women in a bed. But films can totally do the opposite and make the world a better place. I totally believe in that. And so at the moment, I have the feeling I have to do something. And I was in the Antifa for a decade in the 90s when I was young, but I can't do that now. So my mean is the film, and I think I really should use it.
Yeah, actually, I think it's the way for me to express myself. Actually, I'm not so I'm not so a talkative person, but I have so many things I want to say. So I try to put it in my documentary, and I hope my audience watch it and they can digest and understand what I'm talking about. And also, actually, I think the cameras give me some courage to walk walk into the frontiers, because actually if I don't have the cameras, I think I would just go on to the demonstration. I won't go to the frontiers to see what's happening, to see the violence of the police, because I will feel scared. But when I have the cameras, I think I have the responsibility to show the audience what is my perspective, what is the things that I concern most. So I try to go into more and more front of that.
I mean, one of the things that I'm struck by, and this isn't quite connected to your question, none of this is new. My most recent film, 63 Boycott, is about a demonstration. That's the subject of the film, and it's a short. And it was made originally to be used by the people who had organized the demonstration back in 1963. But I only finished it. I mean, I finished a little film for them back in the day, but I finished a longer film more recently. And the police violence, but what has changed, I think, is that the cell phone camera, the fact that so many people do have cameras, that changes the mix. Back when I filmed 63 Boycott, the news media was there. There were a few news clips on the media, but we were the only ones filming this whole demonstration from the point of view of the demonstrators. And so I think, and I was sharing earlier, when 68 happened in the Democratic Convention, the huge demonstrations, I had filmed so many things and had so many responsibilities as a film cameraman. I just wanted to go and be on the streets with everybody else. And so the only camera I brought was a little hand camera that I didn't even have film in. It was a little gun camera, more like as a weapon or something to intimidate the police with, I'm filming you, even though I really wasn't. So I think that, we're facing a lot of new situations in terms of the role that the media plays, and that understanding that when these things are captured, that's one level. But then when we make it into a story, And that's what I think is the role of us as filmmakers. You know, it's not the technology. It's like, what's the story we're telling? Who's at the center of our story?
Right.
So,
And I couldn't have done that when I was still an activist, I must say.
Sure.
When I was in the middle of the Antifa, I wrote my first script about this film. It was 20 years ago. It was horrible. It was like I wanted to convince everybody to join in. And so nobody would have watched that. It needed 20 years to be more precise, to have more questions than answers, which is always more interesting, I think, as a filmmaker. So I could do that. So in one way, I think we have to be activists. In the other way, for me, it was better to be not part of it, to make a film about it. Yeah.
You know, there was a film that I was involved in that's very well known in Chicago, The Murder of Fred Hampton, about the Black Panthers. And these questions come up in that film. And I think one of the things that's interesting is what you mentioned about white privilege and that kind of thing. And those questions came up around the weathermen in Chicago who were involved in some very violent demonstrations. Not that violent, but violent enough. But the Panthers are not a group that's founded on that white privilege. They're coming from a different place and really responding to their communities. So I think it's an interesting contrast to see what made them feel that they needed to be armed and have weapons.
We have that now. It's very new. They call themselves Pantifa, and it's really an Antifa from people of color. And this is something new. And I think it's so great that this is finally happening. We didn't have that before.
I wanted to ask, you guys are dancing around the issue, and I think it's worth exploring more specifically is like, what is the role of a filmmaker versus an activist? Do you feel like you can be both? Do you feel like those two should be separate?
Actually, I'm trying to separate myself to a protester because actually the group of documentary filmmakers in Hong Kong is not so big. I'm afraid if I'm making a documentary, but at the same time I'm being a protester, this will affect their status in when they're filming, because actually the police don't know what is documentary. They just don't like anybody who has camera, and don't like everybody that with the camera and act like a protester. They just think that this is a fake report press or a fake documentary filmmakers, that just more and more violence exists. And actually I try to avoid this, but I'm trying to put my camera into the protester. Actually, I'm always at the side with into the group of protesters to film what they're doing, what they're talking about, more than what is the police doing, what is the tear gas, the ice candy things. I would like to understand their feelings. But of course, I will. They can notice me that I'm not as part of them, and also I think that I am not in the same cause that I am giving, that I am bearing with them. Their cause is too huge. They can put into jail for more than 10 years, and also in the national security law, a imprisonment for the whole lifetime. Actually, when I have a camera and I put my helmet, I have my yellow the yellow vest. Actually, I can protect myself. Get rid of that charges to be in the scene. So I think their cause is much sure than me, that I cannot to be a filmmakers and the protester at the same time in the scene.
I feel very much like an activist at the moment. My film will start next week in Germany, so I'm having a lot of interviews, and I talk very few about the film language, or I don't know, just how I did that film, but so much about why I made this film and what it is about. And so I feel like an activist. And also as a fiction director, I'm actually always an activist because I can make so many right or wrong decisions. And for example, it's very important for me how I present women in film as a fiction director. So when I get a script and I think the female characters are stupid or there are not enough of them, I start to change the script and I turn male characters into female characters, and I do everything I can to change something, to bring pictures where I can talk about the process. So I think we should be activists. And when I made 2 films where I could do nothing, they were just commercial films and they were very successful. I really liked them, but I felt much less sense, and they were still 2 years of my life. So now that I'm in my mid-40s, I decided that I probably will not make films like that again because I feel too much like an activist. Yeah.
It's great.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I ask you, you said something that you were standing inside with the protesters. You were interested in what they were doing. And I think we always have to pay attention to where you're standing. If you're standing behind the police and looking at the protesters, that's one kind of view for the camera. If you're standing with the protesters and looking at the police, you're telling a different story.
Right.
I forgot where I was going.
I mean, I want to. I mean, Gordon, you've been making activist type. I mean, I don't know if it's fair to call them activist films, but you've been making films with a strong social agenda for many years. Do you make a dividing line between the activist and the filmmaker?
It depends on the situation. So when we filmed 63 Boycott, we were involved in the civil rights movement. We had been approached by the people putting on the march and said, this is going to be historic. It needs to be filmed. And you are the guys we know who have cameras. So we were working with them. We're often in situations like that at Cartemplin. We have a new film coming out, Unapologetic, feature-length documentary about the Black Lives Matter movement in Chicago. And the film is by Ashley O'Shea, an African-American woman who she's like you, Kanash, she's focusing on 2 of the leaders of the movement for Black Lives Matter, 2 women leaders in Chicago who she identifies with clearly a lot. They're African-American, they're, non-binary, they have all this shared space. And so that film, and we had a really interesting event where we had Steve talking and we had Ashley there talking about the different way that they approach their storytelling and how that shapes it. Steve, I think, consistently in his films tries to not be objective, not or objective. Only Werner Herzog wants to argue with us about that. He's always saying documentary cannot be objective. Blah, blah, blah. It's like, whoever said it was? Can you stop talking? There's no argument. But Steve's movies are, and I think in America, it's critical that we understand racism is in the white community. It's in a white audience, and we need to make films that are going to reach that audience. So I think, yes, some of our films, you look at some of our older films, they almost look like agitprop. But we also, at the same time, are working with different filmmakers sometimes to reach a really broad audience in the way that City So Real does. There's a lot of humor in the film. There's a lot of music and people's music, and it's just, there's a whole mix of characters that are kind of the mosaic that makes up the Chicago population. Not everybody is in there, but he's trying to represent that sense that this is a city with lots of different aspects to it.
So all 3 films actually, I think, very much have to do with groups.
Yeah.
and group dynamics. And I mean, I think it's interesting. Comrades to me is almost more about the group and how they work together on the streets and the protests than it is about the protests exactly. Like that it is about necessarily the injustice that they're fighting against in some ways. It's really about, I feel like, them as a group. And I think obviously in Tomorrow the Entire World, it's this character's journey, but it's about the group dynamics of the group. And of course, City So Real is like one big social group, social experiment. I'm just curious of how you, I don't know, how you sort of see the films in this, within this idea of like the group, the social group that we all live in some way.
Actually, we make it in a group dimension because we can assess an individual to let us to film. In 2014, I can have some characters that or the real person that would love to have interview with me, let me to go with him for the protest. It's so easy to do that. But in from last year, the protest, I think the main difference when I go into the scene, I found that there is no coronavirus in last year, but all of them are masked. Even just staying in the street, no violence, no such violence. They will all masked because and they are so unfriendly to the cameras. So I try to, I stop it and I put down my cameras and try to talk with them. I just close my lens and ask them, okay, I just record the sound, will you okay? And we just chat. And so I found that because in Hong Kong, the economic influential power of China is very huge. Many Hong Kong people, I can say, is working into the Hong Kong branch of a Chinese company. They are afraid that when the camera recognize their face, the Chinese company will know. And some of them, they have to travel to China to work. They are very afraid to be disappeared in China. Then, like the 12 youth, Hong Kong youth nowadays, they're arrested in China now, but their family in Hong Kong can't communicate with them and can't contact them. It's just detained in China. They are so afraid to be like that. So they are so unfriendly to cameras. Okay, so at that moment, I chat with them. I understand what they're feeling. So I understand that I can't do an individual so how is that individual characters in this protest. So I tried to switch my perspective into a group of protesters. So I Google a lot, or I go into the forum that they most usually to chat and discuss to understand what they are they're thinking. I try to find all these elements into the scene and represent it in my film and represent it in the cinema.
In my case, if Antifa wouldn't be such a strong group, it would be, people wouldn't join it. It's so much about the group. It's so much about love and being part of something cool, and it's partying, it's kickboxing, it's going to demonstrations. It's so much lifestyle also. So all these group things, and I totally have that as a subject in my film. It's very good, but it's also, you can ask yourself, how much is your political motivation to join that group, and how much is it a personal motivation? And
Oh, Julia, you lost your
You
volume.
just lost your sound. Here you go.
There you go.
am I back?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
so the group thing is very important. It makes the movement strong, but it's also sometimes a little bit dangerous because you do things that you don't actually feel like you should do them, but you don't want to, I don't know, you want to stay part of it. And sometimes it's very is that the word? Hierarchic, and it's still quite a male hierarchy in these subcultural groups. So this is also something I talked about in my film. And so I see it very positive, the strong group, and I see it's also something we should be precise about when we talk about a group like the Antifa.
But I like Julia's film very much that although you in a group dimensions, but there is a lot of little details in your film. That I remember there's a protester just in the tunnel. I think she wants to tear off the poster.
She wants to destroy that.
There are some glass vase into making her breathing. Yeah, this is very detailed. I love it very much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, but this is what happened. The right-wing parties, they mixed glass in the glue, and so if you want to rip it off, of course you hurt yourself. And so I like that situation because again, where does the violence start? With the one who puts the glass in the glue, or with the one who tears it down? Where does it start? It's interesting. The whole situation is interesting for me. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah,
it's very nice.
Gordon, anything to add about this the group dynamics? I mean, Chicago is such a it's such a complicated city in terms of its groups, in terms of its segregation, and trying to capture it all, right?
Yeah, I mean, Unapologetic is a film that really looks at the contradictions of a couple of women who are leaders in a movement that they're totally committed to at the same time that they have personal lives and they have lives. One of them is getting her PhD and is very invested in that process at the same time that she's a leader. And I think it's always interesting when you step inside the group and kind of see some of that dynamics. Yeah. But in other films, I think in City So Real is not looking at the groups. It's more looking at the way in which the different groups who represent the city bump up against each other and come into contact. And sometimes people who, you're in a white barber shop with cops, and you're in a black barber shop on the south side, I think it is. And it's like those customers those barbershop people are never going to come into contact unless it's at that place in the protest, unless it's in that conflict. They're never going to know the inside of each other's worlds. And that's one of the things that is threaded throughout City So Real, that it's taking many people in Chicago into spaces that they had never been to be able to encounter people from a human perspective. And I think that's an important role for film to play in a democratic society. But I think, I still believe in films that are like To the Ramparts. They're trying to get people to protest and to go out and do something to make social change. So there's a lot of space in our documentary field.
Do you all think that films can, in fact, impact issues, can lead to change, can be positive?
I hope so. I don't know. But there is a interesting point. I've said that I put my first version of my film online, and after we put comrades online, there is some comments on the Facebook, and someone say that okay. Something said, oh, it's so touching. I cry like that. But someone will say, okay, there is a protest on Monday. There is a strike. Yeah, because Hong Kong people don't like strike. They love to earn money. So when they saw this film, many people say that, okay, I will go on a strike on next Monday. Oh, this really impressed me so much. But I won't say that it's my effort to change this. But I would love to see this kind of conversation under my film, or I can provide another platform for them to discuss what they want to do next.
I totally would say yes to your question. I think with this comes a huge responsibility for us as filmmakers, because we can manipulate easily with our films. I noticed that I had in an early version of my film, I had a montage like Spike Lee did it in BlacKkKlansman, which I found very emotional, the documentary montage at the end of his film. I had something like that in my film, with a lot of police violence and left-wing people fighting against it. And I showed it to a group of young people around my son. And after that, they were like, oh, we hate the police. We hate the police. And that was too easy for me. That was not what I wanted to achieve. So I took that out, and it made the film better, in my opinion, because now you can decide what you think of the police. And especially young people, you can tell them very easily, what is good or bad, and they will believe it. So I think we can make the world a better place, yes, with films, and a worse place.
It Facet's multimedia distribution company here in Chicago, on the Kartemquin page, they, I didn't put it there, but it said films to change the world. I mean, of course we believe that, but I mean, a core value for me is that I believe that art has a critical role to play in the democratic process and in the democratic culture. And so, it's always about the complexities, it's always about the contradictions, and it's always trying to portray in some way the way in which events and demonstrations or policies or things actually have consequences in people's lives. Years ago, we did a series, a big series like City So Real, called The New Americans. It was about immigration. And it was in the early days of the internet. There was some kind of thing with the broadcast of the film. They had, people could post like what you were describing. And there was one genre of post, this went out on, public television broadcast, was, I see what you people are up here. You've got an agenda. You're trying to make me see that these immigrants love their children, and that they're human, and that they're kind of like me in many ways. And you sort of did, and I resent it. And I was like, I'll take that. That's great. That's who we want to. We just opened that viewer a wedge. They're not where we want them to be, but we made them feel something. And so I think that's what films do. That's what a series like City So Real can do, because the mosaic of people that it's presenting is so broad that hopefully everyone will come to watch it, in a sense, because they are represented in this complicated and nuanced way. And over the years, we found when you present people in that way, they look at your film and they say, I know I don't look so good there, but you're telling the truth about me. And the cheap shot, it's a good point, Julia, that the cheap shot is how you get into trouble.
Yeah.
I think we can kind of wind up here. I'm wondering, do you guys have any questions for each other? I realize you haven't seen each other's work, but I'm just curious.
No, she did some.
She did. She saw your film. I know.
And I will now try to get a ticket for yours, but I think I can't. It's only in the US.
Well, we can help you find it.
That's so nice. I would love to see both films, because now I'm so interested.
I saw your trailer, but I didn't see the film.
I can send you a link.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I don't know, we've landed on a sort of more optimistic final thought, but I guess I'm curious, Gordon, you said that, we've been here before, right? There's been some very tough struggles in the past, civil rights struggle, some brutal things that have happened in our past. But right now, I don't know, from my perspective, it seems pretty bleak. Canis, you were saying that, Hong Kong is now, the situation there is the worst that you've ever experienced. I'm wondering how you're all feeling about your respective countries right now and where you're at.
Actually, I try to get rid of this kind of feeling. Yeah, because it's very sad. And I've told that I have made more than 5 documentary shorts, and at my fourth, making the fourth one, because I push myself too much. I would like to finish my editing in 3 days. Yeah, but I failed to do so in my fourth film, because when I see the footage, when I see the tear gas in the computer on the computer screen, I don't know why I start crying, and why there is side effect of smelling tear gas is vomiting, but I don't know why this exists when I just seeing the screen, the scene of the tear gas. So actually, I found one of my friends to help me to finish the editing. But sometimes I try to get rid of it. I just look at what I'm going to do next to continue, because nowadays I think Hong Kong people should be strong. Of course, if they feel depressed, they should ask someone to help or to talk. But I try to get rid of it, to start to continue work.
Julia?
Yeah, I'm optimistic that the democracy is very strong in Germany, and that it grew very strong in the last 70 years. And but still, I think we have to be aware, because the NSDAP, they had 13% in 1929, and then it rose very quickly. So we know that numbers. So we should watch the AfD sharply. And but I'm optimistic because I see a political young generation growing up now, and they are more political than my generation was. They are perhaps more like my parents, which fought in the 60s and 70s, and I totally embrace that.
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm 78. The 60s was my era, the 60s and 70s, and many of the people that I knew in that era were still they're still fighting. They're still, even as the older generation. And so I think it is a difficult time, and we have seen authoritarian regimes coming to power around the world. We have one in our own country here right now. And when there is an authoritarian regime, it changes the dynamic about how you fight and stand up for your rights. I think that's a little bit about what you were saying in Hong Kong. It's like, you can't just protest. You have to know that there's that potential for violence on the other side. And so, we're about to have an election that may change those dynamics, and we may be in a situation where we're still struggling and we're still fighting, but not with an authoritarian or fascist regime, because I think that is a danger,
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so
Well,
much.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah.
I wish you all safety and health, and onward. We continue. Yeah.
Great to meet you guys.
Great to meet you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.